Academy, presidents, governors, business leaders, and now you're stuck with a farm kid from Kent County. We're just blessed with great opportunities. The privilege, for example, of joining the W.K. Kellogg Foundation as a program director in agriculture in 1965, and then the incredible experience of soon becoming a vice president, and then in 1970 becoming the CEO of the foundation, with the responsibility but the privilege of providing leadership for that institution at the period of dramatic growth. And we were just talking at lunch about the challenge now in philanthropy at the Kellogg Foundation, where there's tremendous growth, and now you look at what's happening to that line and how do they cope with the realities of forward commitments to grantees, institutions, organizations that are depending on that philanthropic component. So it's a tremendous challenge. So I became the chief executive officer of what became one of the largest grant-making philanthropies literally in the world. So if you want that kind of an opportunity, major in horticulture, pomology preferably, and go from there. You all know that our society is comprised of three major components, simplistically. The business sector, the for-profit sector, the economic generator of everything, and that makes everything else possible. And so we need a viable, vital, and it's critically evident right now that we've got concerns in that area. But that's the basic source of all that we have. So that's a very important sector. The second sector, of course, the public sector, governmental sector, from the local township, village, city, county, state, federal. Again, very important that we have vital, effective public institutions, services, organizations. And then the third sector is the one that's less clear. And we call it the nonprofit sector, the independent sector. But if you look at the quality and character of life at the community where life is lived by most of us, much of the character, the personality of the community, whether you're in a little village, in a rural town, in Grand Rapids, much of that character is a contribution of this nonprofit sector. Now they're all collaborative because our nonprofit organizations, institutions, and programs depend very obviously upon the success of the business sector for contributions and for employees who in turn can give. Philanthropy, Kathy, simplistically is the giving of time and talent as well as treasure. We sometimes think it's just that financial, but equally important in making things happen in communities, the contribution of time and talent. And you think of the leadership here in Grand Rapids. You look at the quality of life. You look, this is a public university, but you look at what private contributions, the Howenstein Center, the Johnson Center, the facilities we're in, this beautiful downtown campus, many of the great developments at Allendale, all a collaborative effort of private initiatives with public resources for the public benefit. So I had the privilege of being in the philanthropic sector and looking at opportunities for assisting. So I'm not sure where I can be most useful. The challenge always, of course, in leadership, as you assume responsibilities again, is to have vision. I always define the leaders very simplistically as any person who identifies either an opportunity, who's opportunistic, in other words, sees an opportunity to make a difference, to do something differently, to do something better, to enrich, to touch the lives of others. Sees either an opportunity or a problem. something that needs to be addressed, that needs to be changed. So a leader is simply anybody who sees either a problem or an opportunity and does something about it. And if it's a lack of recreation in the neighborhood, maybe the organizer of Little League or a Girl Scout program. And leadership has many manifestations in different points. So the challenge as you move into leadership responsibilities is to recognize that most of the serious problems that confront us as a society, whether we look in Grand Rapids or West Michigan or Midwest or the country or the world, most of the problems that really concern us cannot be cannot be effectively addressed by any one specialty. Now, we as a society benefit tremendously from dramatic, incredible specialization. And if you look at the medical field, for example, and the miraculous things which are happening in surgery and so forth, incredible specialization. If you look at any other of the societal issues, and if you look at the agenda of President-elect Obama, and you look at the issue just domestically of the economy, you know, and of health, and of education, and of energy, and of environmental issues, and the list goes on. All of those issues are too complex to be addressed effectively by one specialty. And so one of the keys you need to think of as you're moving forward, whether it's in finance or business or education or social work or whatever, is how as a leader can I begin to identify the nature of a problem and then identify the others who can work with me to help deal with it. I very often use simply the idea of drinking water in West Michigan. Most of us drink drinking water from the underground water aquifers. I'm not sure, maybe this is West Michigan today, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's underground water that's our drinking water source. And so we have to be concerned about the quality and preservation and the safety of underground water. So we need specialists who know about soil types and percolation rates and the deterioration of viable chemicals so that they don't pollute the underground water. So we have to have all of that technical expertise. But then we have to look at the economics, and then we have to look particularly at the political process, political science majors, because underground water quality is basically a responsibility of townships. And most of the influence on percolation, water pollution, and where the pollutant comes in and where it ends up, and underground water streams and so forth, political issues are paramount in dealing with that issue. So simply to say that we need specialists in water quality, inadequate to dealing with the problem. And if you look, for example, at concerns now in public education, incredible questions about how we can go about in any systematic way addressing our concerns in public. Let's simplify it. K-12. We know K is too late, don't we, educators? We've missed the first 5 years, which are perhaps most important of all, and we as a society just virtually ignore them completely. So that's the kind of challenge that I had the privilege of dealing with. Now sometimes you take on tough issues. I'll just share one example for a horticultural major that as I assumed broader responsibilities, we won't go into the history of the Kellogg Foundation. Mr. Kellogg finished school at less than 8th grade, went on into business, a successful entrepreneur, committed his fortune then to philanthropy in the decade of the 30s, and gave all of his assets, that was 53% of the ownership of the common stock of the Kellogg Company, to the Kellogg Foundation in 1935. And so as I became the CEO of the company, of the foundation, became also a director of the company. And this was in the mid-80s that apartheid in South Africa was a very critical issue. And the sentiment here in this country was that we should divest, we should get out of South Africa, because by staying there in business, you're supporting the existing system. And I was on the board of directors of the Kellogg Company, and just to give one example of things that come your way as you assume leadership roles. The Kellogg Company in 1947 had established a small branch operation in South Africa. And they had about 450 employees. Reverend Sullivan was a great leader in civil rights in this country, and he had established standards suggested to businesses for doing business in South Africa, of integration, of benefits, opportunities, and so forth. And so the Kellogg Company had exceeded all of the Sullivan principles. They had integrated the workforce, all of the facilities. They had South African blacks in positions in administration and finance and research and marketing, in production, and had worked closely with the townships in improving housing and schools and health services. And they were the first company in South Africa to recognize a black union. Bill Lamoth was the CEO of the company. And the pressure was on from shareholders for Kellogg to get out of South Africa. And Bill said to the board of directors, he said, you know, we can do that. It's, in terms of bottom line of the business, it's not that important. He said, but we've been there and we've worked with those people. I've given those people 25-year service pins. And if we sell, we'll sell to South Africa, Germany, or Japan. And none of them will carry on what we've been doing with our folks. So he asked 3 outside directors to go to South Africa, to review the situation, and to come back with a recommendation for the board of directors, which they would follow. And so he asked Peter Estes, who was a retired vice president of General Motors, who had been active in South Africa, Paul Smucker of the J.M. Smucker Company, just a marvelous human being. Pete Estes, Paul Estes, Pete Estes, Paul Smucker, Russ Mawby, to be a three outside directors to go to the company. We went to Washington and met with the ambassador and others from South Africa, met with our State Department, did bushels of reading, met with a gentleman called Chief Botoleza, who was a South African tribal leader. We went to South Africa. We met with people in government. We met with people in the labor unions. We visited with people in business, industry, all aspects of operation there. The first unsettling thing was that we came into Johannesburg. I had a certain image of South Africa, obviously, from all of the reading and the media. Stayed in a beautiful hotel, 6 stars, I think. And we went up that evening to the dining room, and at that table, we were at this table, that table, 4 black men. At this table, 2 black couples. Completely unexpected from my image of what apartheid really did. So the realities were quite different in some respects than I had anticipated. Now that didn't mean apartheid was there, very evident. But when I went to Soweto, there were all of the cardboard and tin shanties, but there was also a country club, and there were homes of Bishop Tutu and others, more elegant than I could imagine living in, all in the township. So there was a disconnect. So we talked with all sorts of people, and in particular, black leaders of civil rights organizations and of the union asked us to stay. And businessmen asked us to stay because we could provide pressure and opportunity for them to do what they wanted to do for their workers also. So we came back and recommended that the Kellogg Company should stay. I, wearing my foundation hat, had talked with our board of trustees previously about this possibility. The Kellogg Foundation started initially very small in South Central Michigan, became national, became international throughout Latin America in 1942 at the start of World War II. And then following the war, became international again, Latin America and Northern Europe for about 30 years. And in 1980, we began phasing out of Europe, expanding in Latin America, and looking at the continent of Africa. In talking with people in South Africa then, first thing you realized was that most of the major universities were integrated, and that there were more black Africans qualified to go to university than had opportunities to go with scholarships. We could bring, many foundations had been bringing South Africans here, but we could support 7 students in South Africa for the cost of bringing 1 here. And so we began to work immediately with South African universities. And instead of having another study trip, which many foundations had done, our board authorized one of our officers to go. We picked the fields of health professions, education, food systems, and rural development, public administration, and business administration for our concentration. Because it was so vivid that it's not a question of if apartheid will end. Apartheid was wrong, it was going to end. The question was, when does it end, and how does it end? And how can we prepare enough black women and men for the opportunities which obviously will be present for them and which the country will desperately need. So that was the spring and February of 1985 that I visited there. We went back to South Africa in the summer, and we had our first bursary scholarship students. And we committed to students at those universities on a basis of completing their degree. We would stay with them on full cost as long as they made progress for their objective. So that apartheid then ended much more quickly than had been projected. It really ended in 1990, and we began to help produce the cadre of leaders. Well, it was a controversial decision, difficult decision, but the kind of opportunity that you'll find in your leadership responsibilities. So let me just stop here and see what you would like to talk about if we motivated a question anywhere. Yes?
I read in an interview that you did, I think it might have been the Battle Creek newspaper, and in it you mentioned something, I can't remember the exact quote, but you attributed it to your father about optimism. About optimism?
Yeah.
And how important it is to keep an optimistic outlook. It can be, I found it can be really easy to be negative. I don't know if it's, it's just,
yeah.
It takes a little bit of effort to be optimistic.
Well,
and I was just kind of wondering if you could touch on how important it is.
I find optimism, being optimistic, a lot more fun than being pessimistic. And has far greater prospects of really making things better for the future. And I find that a lot of it is simply mindset. And you get up in the morning and you can let yourself go downhill, or you can make yourself go uphill. So I think a basic mindset of recognizing that most people are good. Now, there are a few bums in the world, but most people are good. And I always had the privilege in being a grant maker that most everyone who came to you had a sincere commitment to what they were trying to accomplish, whatever it was, in work with the elderly and environmental issues, whatever the issue, they were sincere in their effort, and they needed assistance in moving forward with their plans. So I think as I look at our situation today, we've got a lot of very bright people. We've done some very dumb things. I think our greatest challenge, perhaps, as I think about society in general, is that we need to rethink our commitment to education. we need to realize that we've institutionalized a system that started in 1837. And I'm grateful to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the historians, keep me honest more or less here, in which the territory, west of Pennsylvania, north of the Ohio River, all the way to the Mississippi, and that's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, came into the new United States of America. And in that ordinance, it specified that in every township, land would be, the government didn't have any money, but they had federal lands. And federal land in every township would be provided to be sold to build a one-room country school. And that's why I went to two-room, I've lived on Orchard View Farm, went to Orchard View School. Jim Robinette was in a poor community. They had a one-room Peach Grove School up on the East Beltline. But you think of that commitment. I always marvel at the early folks. All of higher education initially was private. And so all the old universities. The founding institution, the University of Michigan, was a private school that then became a public university. So public higher education really didn't become manifest until 1863 with the creation of the land grant system under President Lincoln. Why? He needed officers for the Union Army, and ROTC was a motivating factor in the improvement of what had been started in Congress in the previous administration. So public higher education is a fairly new phenomenon, but we've institutionalized then, beginning in 1837, and as public elementary education in this new region became an idea in the original colonies and was adopted in Massachusetts. And a guy named Horace Mann set up the school year and the school curriculum. School year starts when potatoes are dug and ends when it's time to plant corn. And we still operate that way in Grand Rapids, and most of you are out digging potatoes in the fall. No, it's an archaic system. The school year is wrong. The school day is wrong for the contemporary family. And on we could go. So I'm optimistic about, basically, about the future of this country. We've got some tough problems. And I think we all pray that we've elected a statesman who will bring the country together and will bring the world together differently. It's an awesome agenda. Just think of getting up in the morning and worrying about everything, everything. And picking the right women and men to carry on the leadership, because President Obama is a charismatic leader, and we hope that he can pick the right people to deal with energy and jobs and nuclear proliferation and so forth. So optimism, I prescribe it. Good.
You were talking, and it was really, I saw a great line of parallel, because as I was driving in today, I was thinking, what does the Hollenstein Center mean to me? I come to this event, once a month, and I said, well, what am I getting out of this? And there's some immediate benefits. And one of the most particularly salient things that came to mind was the idea of perspectives. The fact that we have all these perspectives in the room, and we all don't necessarily have a united agenda, but we all have some place, we have goals that we want to be at, and we can talk to other people and demonstrate those goals with them. But my question is, and you talked about a liberal education, sort of, when you were in your undergraduate.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
You sample the greatness of the university, and how important is it? And can you reflect on a time when perspectives were really important in making a decision? And you talked about President Obama making, really good decisions on picking his staff and making sure that those perspectives are there. Can you reflect on a time when those perspectives were really important to your decision making?
Well, I think you always have to have, as you recognize that we have an opportunity here to take steps. We usually can't move a mile. And so you have to have, however, a vision of what you hope will ultimately be accomplished. And in the realities of the moment, resources, political processes, different perspectives, people come together, and the problem is to get consensus to move ahead, that you have to be realistic in terms of how far you can move. But you always need to know where it is that ultimately you want to be. And you know, I think of the different opportunities that you always have to sort of move forward, whether it's with your local church, your Rotary Club, your professional association. All of these, you'll be moving into multiple leadership roles. And you begin by becoming engaged. And you need to have an idea of where this profession ought to go. What's the ultimate goal you envision for health care in this country? It's certainly something different than we have at the moment. But how do we move from where we are with the fragmentation of the health professions? How do we move forward, and what steps can be taken? So I'm not sure I'm helpful, but it's always important to know what's the vision you have in mind, and you want to share with others to help them see how what we can do now can help accomplish that ultimately. It's the unending challenge, I think, of the leader of looking ahead. And one of the greatest dangers in philanthropy, in my judgment, in my role, and one of the great problems, I think, in politics and in a lot of other walks of life, it's very easy to become disconnected from the reality of life for most people. Now just think of what we've enjoyed this noon. And I suppose 80% of the total people in the world today, for lunch, cooked it in a pot over an open fire. And the difference, the differential, is untenable over time. And how do we, as Americans, envision a differing role? First, in maybe our region of the world, how do we deal with the realities of immigration from Mexico? The river didn't make any difference. Is a fence going to solve the problem? How do we deal with that kind of reality? So that those things have to be a part of the leader's mind, and how do we make those differential steps toward what ultimately we think should be the change situation. Yes?
Ralph, or Russ, could you give us a couple examples of leaders that you have worked with, and tell just a brief story about what you thought the leadership attributes were for those people?
Well, leadership attributes for those people. Yeah, one of the great leaders that I've had the experience of being in philanthropy was a guy named Bob Payton. Bob had a career first in higher education, had been a university president. Bob Payton then had been ambassador to one of the small countries in Western Africa. Bob Payton then was with Exxon as their corporate grant maker, and then moved to Indiana University to set up what is the premier now world-class Center on Philanthropy in a university setting. And he was a man who was eternally optimistic. Everything that life dealt him, he coped with effectively. He lost 2 sons in Africa. And he and Polly survived that. His goal was to make the Center on Philanthropy an integral part of the total university, and not to have it as a Center on Philanthropy in some corner of some department in some building. And that's the same vision that Kathy and others have here. Because whatever your major is, you know, you will be a philanthropist if you are a leader. Because if you're a leader, you're going to be giving your time and talent beyond the demands of your paycheck, certainly. And you're going to be giving of some of your material resources as well. So you need to understand how the concept of private initiative for the public good is a part of every career, whether you're in law and medicine or business or political science or whatever. You need to be engaged with society at large. And one of the realities is that you very soon can begin to lose touch with life where it's lived by most people. And so you need to deliberately, discipline yourself to somehow live differently than you might because of the affluence which you're privileged to experience. And so that's a great challenge. Bob Payton just lived philanthropy. He was committed, he had the right values, he was a person of faith, and he simply made a tremendous difference. Now the second one is a guy named Rushworth Kidder. Anybody acquainted with Rushworth Kidder, the Institute for Global Ethics? Rush Kidder was a journalist, and with his latest part of his professional career was with the Christian Science Monitor. And in the early 1990s, he did a global study, traveled around the world, because he was troubled by the lack of consensus as we looked at countries and regions and nations and ethnic groups and so forth. Are there any things that bring us together? We can talk about all of the things that sort of are divisive, but what are the things that bring us together? And he identified 5 values: honesty, caring, respect, responsibility, and fairness. And he left the Christian Science Monitor, started an Institute for Global Ethics, and is now, as the best of his books for an old farm boy, is How Good People Make Tough Decisions. And if you want a thoughtful expose about how, whether you're in business or you're in teaching or you're in social work, wherever your life takes you, how good people make tough decisions, Rush Kidder. He's gone on now and has done ethics, and I'm sure in the Leadership Academy you get into ethical issues. Because you'd have to say, well, the big part of our credit crunch today is what? The product of greed. Greed in high places. And it's intolerable. So Rush Kidder has just, I think, moved on as a leader in the whole business of ethics in politics, ethics in personal life, ethics in business, ethics in philanthropy. Because if you want to be abusive, you can be with charitable dollars, whether you're on the recipient end or the privilege of being the giving end. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but people who have a vision and a commitment and I'll say a passion for making a difference in relation to some issue which they really think is important. The last question, what time does class adjourn?
I'll do a quick one, Russ. You've had a lot of power, actual positional power and real power because of the strength of the Kellogg Foundation.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your own philosophy about the use of power?
Well, that's where you come right into ethical concerns, it seems to me. And there is positional power. There is the power of control of wealth and resources. And it seems to me comes back to I'm a person of faith, and I always have the trouble of how do I live every day by the values that I think I understand from the Bible. And I come back, finally I had sort of sorted out values, and then Rush Kidder clarified them a little bit. You got to be honest, you got to be caring, you got to be respectful, you got to be responsible, and you got to be fair. And so I just very conscientiously try to use that. I tried to use it in my CEO role with employees. There was no unimportant job at the Kellogg Foundation. In some issues, mine was the least important. If the air conditioning went out, I couldn't do a thing about it. Somebody else knew. So every job was important. I greeted every employee who came to the staff. We had an open door policy at the Kellogg Foundation. Every phone call was answered, every letter was responded. And we tried just to be engaged, never to impose, but to be collaborative with those who wish to accomplish something important. Now, the foundation couldn't do everything, so we had certain areas of issues in which we concentrated, but we were looking then, we never had the answers. People had the answers. People, their institutions, their organizations, their communities had problems, and if we could be helpful, we wanted to be helpful to them. And so we worked with a wide range of community organizations to the prestigious institutions of this country and abroad. So power is again, a tremendous privilege and can be easily misused, sometimes in very subtle ways. So.
Thank you very much. Now you know why I wanted Russ to come and speak to you, because on that warm summer day in August, this past August, when we 4 or 5 folks went to Russ's home, and he told us his background, and he told us about those 5 values, I thought, you have got to share that with us, and you have. Talk about sharing, and, you know, being able to impart something of lasting value. I think you've done it today. You're a teacher. This guy is really a teacher. As a small token of our appreciation, we'd like to give to you a Hallenstein Center tote bag, and it's got some interesting things in it, including Ralph Hallenstein's book, Intelligence Was My Line. And you can hear more about Ralph's very interesting life, too. He inspires what we do here.
I've got to get that a signed copy.
And also wanted to give you a Hallenstein Center mug, and what's in the mug is great. It's Andy's Mints, which of course he's also responsible for. Sweeten your day. So the Andy's Mints, and I'll just a little pad and some information, a Constitution, which you already know, and all that kind of thing. But we just thank you so much. I certainly appreciate it, Russ. Thank you.
Let me close with one line. Okay.
Yes, please.
Orchard View School, long time ago, learned 4 lines that I've never forgotten. Margaret Wilcox was our teacher. These lines go like this. I'm only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. So if each of us will simply do what we can do and ought to do, we'll make a difference. And I wish you Godspeed.